Welcome to Masculine Geek, where men gather to discuss life, love, and all things geek. And unlike most YouTube channels, we don't beg for super chats. We don't play cutesy little sound bites. That crap is lame and feminine. We're men swapping notes and gathering together for men talk. We don't whine about politics or trendy red meat topics. That's juvenile 13th grade garbage. Masculine geeks are men of courage and honor that gather together to discuss our hobbies and interests. Get on board, gentlemen.
All right, get on board. Welcome to Masculine Geek number 282. This is the Three Investigators with Mike Davis of the Lovecraft eZine. Welcome back, Mike. How are you?
Hey, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. And for those who do not know, the Three Investigators mystery series was a mystery series written. There you go. There's one of the original hardback covers.
1964. This is book number 2.
Yep.
Nice.
Robert Arthur started writing these books in 1963 from Cape May, New Jersey, actually, right over here in this state. And this is something that's very near and dear to many people's hearts, Mike's and mine alike. We started reading these. Well, I can say I started reading these in 7th grade. And I didn't really know about them until a friend of mine who sat next to me in English class had brought them in to read. And like the cover caught my eye. It was the first one, The Secret of Skeleton Island, or The Secret of Terror Castle. Yeah, The Secret of Skeleton Island is the 7th one, or it's somewhere down 5th or 7th one down the line that Robert Arthur wrote. He wrote the first 10, 1 through 9, and then 11, and number 10 was written by William Arden. But I saw that first one, that cover caught my eye. I'm like, oh, that's really cool. And at the time, I was reading the Hardy Boys. It's along the same lines as that, very pulpy. But I think the writing is a little bit than the Hardy Boys series. I don't know if you agree with that.
I 100% agree.
I totally think that's, yeah.
I got that.
Yeah.
Oh,
go ahead, TJ.
So my question, I need to read those. I got a whole bunch of books, like a 900-page biography on Patton that I'm going through right now, trying to peruse every night. I haven't read the Three Investigators. What I'm curious with is how much of like their character development and backstory did they go into? Because one of the things that's interesting, I had a conversation with a friend of mine about this, is where people are reading books where there's not a lot of character development. And they're like, well, and they complain about it. And he goes, well, that's not the genre that this is about. It's not about character development. It's about characters who are previously established. They are what they are, and they're going through adventures together, or they're going through adventures on their own, like Solomon Kane, or, like, for example, Sherlock Holmes, to just borrow one, like, he doesn't really have any meaningful character changes compared to, say, even frankly James Bond, because I've read the James Bond, the original Ian Fleming ones. He goes through transformation throughout the books, whereas other books they don't. But some people, that's a sticking point. Like, they want to read about a character changing, whereas some books and genres are not meant for character development and character changes. They like the fact that they're going to read a book about the same character in every book they read. So
that's exactly what these are. Yeah, there's no there's a little bit of backstory. There has to be some backstory, of course.
Right.
But as far as character changes, no, you could read the first one and then number 44 in the original series, and they're the same character.
Right.
With the same backstory, the same parent, obviously the same parent. Nothing changes, and they're still almost the same. They're almost the same age. They're young teens.
Yeah.
The prior novels don't interrupt, like, you being able to enjoy, because this is totally off topic, but just throwing it out there. Like, one of the things that people said about the TV show Scrubs is that you could watch season 4, episode 3. You wouldn't have to know anything about the prior episodes, but like they didn't require context in order to understand. It's kind of like, for example, reading a Joseph Conrad novel, where if you lose yourself on page 33, you're not going to understand what's going on page 64, and you have to follow everything through that. And the nice thing about a lot of these novels that you were describing is that, apparently with the Three Investigators, is that you don't need to know anything about them prior from a previous novel to just be able to pick them up and enjoy them.
That's really the beauty of pulp.
Yeah, that's why I appreciate it. about pulp is like you don't have to follow or like because I mean there was like the Tarzan series, there was the Princess of Mars series where there's a lot of books, right? And you don't want to have to read 20 books in order to appreciate the 21st book.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah.
Each Three Investigators book would give a little bit of background on who the three investigator kids were, but just into the story as it came up naturally. You know, like when they went to visit. Let's take book number 2 here. When they go to their headquarters in the junkyard, it's at that point that Robert Arthur says, you know, here's how they created headquarters, which is cool. Now, I mean, you mentioned the Hardy Boys. Yeah, and yeah, Joe's eternally 17 years old and Frank is eternally 18 years old.
Yep.
I don't have a problem with that. But I read Hardy Boys too, and I felt like I graduated from Hardy Boys to the Three Investigators because I thought the Three Investigators were just a bit more realistic, you know, and you know, Jupiter's parents aren't private detectives; they own a junkyard, you know. Yeah. How do you want to set up this series for those who haven't read it, Vince?
How do I want to what?
Explain the series for those who haven't read it.
All right, so it's basically 3 young lads in their probably 13 or 14. And in the first one, Jupiter Jones and his friends Pete Crenshaw and Robert Andrews they toss around the idea of having a detective agency because Jupiter is sort of a mini Sherlock Holmes type. He's very methodical, very logical, very focused for someone his age, very intelligent. And they each bring something to the table. Jupiter's brains, Pete's muscles and athleticism, and Robert's research and ability to do research at the local library. Bear in mind, this is the 60s. There's no internet, so book knowledge and having someone who works at the library was, you know, that's great. So with all these things in place and the fact that Jupiter won a contest at a local car company where he guessed the amount of jelly beans in a jar and got the use of a Rolls Royce for 30 days of 24 hours each. And that's an important thing to say because he uses that wording to his advantage and the help of a friend to get more time pulled out of the car as far as using it. So this golden Rolls Royce comes complete with a chauffeur. So that allows them to get around and to fully implement their plan of becoming the Three Investigators.
It kind of reminds me of Magnum PI, where he's got that whole mansion to himself because
well, there's no mansion. This is actually a old mobile trailer that his aunt and uncle forgot about. Yeah, he lives with it and Jupiter Jones is aunt. He lives with his aunt and uncle because his parents had died.
Jones, what a perfect pulp name.
It's a great name. It's a great name. So Jupiter Jones lives with his aunt and uncle in this junkyard, and he's always tinkering with things. So it's sort of a James Bondish type thing where he creates these gadgets. But their headquarters is a mobile home with secret entrances to it, and his aunt and uncle, even though they gave it to him, they kind of forgot about it because he keeps piling junk on top of it. So
over the course of a year, the 3 of them slowly pile junk all around it until his aunt and uncle kind of forget about it.
They do, even though they gave it to him, they completely forgot about it. And they have secret entrances. They have Green Gate 1, Tunnel 2, which is a tunnel underneath piles of junk underneath the floorboard and a trapdoor in the mobile home. And Easy 3 and Red Gate Rover. So there's 4, and they're all at different spots, strategically placed around the junkyard.
It's a huge junkyard. So
it's a whole block.
Well,
it's called Jones Salvage Yard because it sounds good. It was originally called Jones's Junkyard, and Jupiter convinced his uncle Titus to change it because it sounded a little more commercial and a little more upscale. Salvage Yard. Junkyard, salvage yard sounds better.
These came out in the 60s, right?
Yeah.
The first one came out in 64.
Well, it kind of reminds me of like not to sidetrack at all, but like in the Sandlot, they talk about the junkyard. They talk about the junkyard. Like, this just caused me to kind of get curious. Like, what was the social status of someone who owned a junkyard back then in the 60s? Like what did that mean?
The community loves them. As a matter of fact,
Okay.
the owner Titus, his
Titus
uncle,
Jones
has been very good to the community, and the community love him so much that local artists, one side of the junkyard is a huge wooden privacy fence, or a very long one, I should say, and local artists have painted over time a picture of a painting of the San Francisco 1906 fire. So they were looked up to in the community.
and the sailboat too. That's what they call Green Gate
Right.
1 for the ocean.
Yeah, because I mean, there were some professions, you know, at certain times where it was kind of like it was necessary, but it wasn't dignified. And then there was some
Well,
where
there was one of the novels called the Flaming Footprints. There's a potter in it, and he often gets free pieces of junk from the salvage yard in exchange for pottery. So they're not averse to bartering too. So it's kind of cool.
Because I was kind of looking at like throughout history, there's been certain professions where they're necessary. Somebody's got to do it, but they don't. It's not a prestigious trade or profession, but it's like somebody's got to do this job. Whereas there's some other jobs where they may not be prestigious, like in what they're doing or dignified, but like it just gets you status. So I was curious, like if you in a town in like 1960, you owned a junkyard, what would the people say? Would they say like, oh, that, you know, it's like somebody's got to do it, or you know, it's like being the doctor or the lawyer or the football coach, like what, you know, like was
it never really comes up, except, you know, occasionally the author will mention something like how good Titus is to the community and everything, and that the local community loves the salvage yard. So yeah, it's not really
probably
an issue.
Probably because he has stuff that people can use, and he doesn't charge too much, and like it allows them to, you know, live off, like not have to spend money, because I mean junkyards are just, they're full of junk, so you can go grab what you need.
Well, back in the 60s, you know, you think of a junkyard today, all right, and I'm not too interested. But in the 60s, in the 70s, in the 80s, you say junkyard, and man, it's really salvage yard is how they refer to it, because there's all kinds of neat things, you know, in this salvage yard that people peruse and they can use. And the guy who wrote this series, or at least wrote the first 9 or 10 books, a guy by the name of Robert Arthur, he wrote, for example, kind of a famous horror short story that he wrote is called Footsteps Invisible. And you can actually listen to that on Pseudopod. If you Google Pseudopod and Footsteps Invisible, and it's one of my favorite short stories, actually horror short stories. But my point is, this guy's a legit writer when he creates this series, and he came up with genius things like Jupiter being smart enough to, you know, guess the number of jelly beans. So they have the use of the limousine. So he's solving problems right away about how would these kids get around. That's number one. And, you know, the salvage yard, the whole concept of it was, you know, I think just brilliant.
It's absolutely brilliant.
Well, and you got to wonder how many kids back in the 60s and earlier would go find some car that they would drag out of there for pennies on the dollar, restore it into a hot rod. I mean, I think that's how a lot of kids got their start in a lot of automobile stuff, is they dragged some car that got junked, brought it back, and those cars were so simplistic in how they were engineered. You didn't have to spend a lot of money getting those things restored. And so you would have a hot rod, and you would cruise through town, and the hot rods didn't need to be fully complete. So yeah, you could see how a lot of people would spend their time at the junkyard trying to just find like stuff that they were thrown away, because it was just so it's kind of like it's a little bit more of a masculine way of going to Goodwill in a neighborhood where it's like the richest people on the planet, and they're like, yeah, this is a Rolls Royce, you know, not the latest year. I'll just give it away to Goodwill. You know?
Well, yeah, so you have these three boys, and they start investigating things. And I was struck by something in book 2, because I reread the first half of book 2 today just to refresh my memory. And first of all, I read these, as Vince probably did, in the early 80s, 1981, 1982, somewhere around in there. And it never struck me growing up that there was, in much of it, I'm not sure what word I'm looking for, but there wasn't any difference in the time. In other words, I didn't feel like, oh, these are dated. That's the word I was looking for. These are set in the 60s. They're dated. For a kid. And
that was only like 20 years ago.
Well, there was, yeah. And there wasn't much difference between 64 and 82 when it came to some things, And so it wasn't dated for me. But I was struck by a couple of things when I read this book today. Number one, Jupiter talks about, in case of emergency, they have a mobile phone in the Rolls Royce. This is 1964. Yep. Now think, and that is, they were around, but think like even 30 years later, picture 1994. I didn't have a cell phone, in 1994.
That was a luxury item. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And I'm thinking of that line from Scream. What are you doing with a cellular phone, son?
I feel like that's actually an interesting concept with a lot of books, that where you need footnotes for stuff, and especially even for historical stuff where you got to explain the context of, like, this person said this, and this is the context. Like, got a kid in 1960 talking about like a phone in a car. Like, this is revolutionary. This means the car is worth a lot of money.
Yeah.
Or it's like, this is a fancy car, or he's really, or if the kid built the phone, like, let's just, go there. If the kid built the phone in the car or built his own mobile phone, that's trying to show his genius at the time. Whereas a kid today is not going to appreciate what that means. Like, we all have cell phones. But
here's another way that they did something that's a lot easier for us today. In book 2, they created, Jupiter came up with what he called the ghost-to-ghost hookup. And what this was is they were looking for, make a long story short, the car that the bad guy drove. So they're trying to find this guy. And Jupiter explains it to his friends like this. How many friends do you have, Pete, here in the area? How many friends do you have, Bob? And they both say, 8 to 10 friends and everything. He goes, here's what you do. He goes, I'm going to call 5 friends, and I'm going to explain, it's basically like the Baker Street Irregulars in a way. But he says, I'm going to call 5 friends and kids who notice things, especially boys in cars. And he goes, I'm going to ask them if they've seen this car. And if the answer is no, I'm going to ask each one of them to call 5 friends and do the same thing and ad infinitum. And Jupiter does this, Bob does this, Pete does this. And, in the book, just about everyone they asked to do it does it. And later that night, Bob's calculating quickly how quickly this can multiply into hundreds and hundreds of people. And there's this one scene where Bob goes home and his mother's got this puzzled look on her face because she can't get through to any friends. And he's like, oh shit. And he realizes what the answer is. And he goes, yeah, that's probably just an error with the phone company, Mom. You should try again later, so, but, today, what would we do? We'd post it on social media, but it's an ingenious idea. Another brilliant idea by Robert Arthur,
Yep. Another one they did too is they always carried special chalk.
Oh,
so
yeah.
So if they were to get lost or separated, they could say, all right, well, Jupiter left this mark because it's white chalk and it's an arrow pointing this way. It's just like a question mark saying, hey, I was here.
Well, when I was in 2nd grade, there was a story I read about this, like, it's a kid's book, but it was about a guy who's like a private investigator, a would-be kid investigator. And what he did is he took mustard and like he saw a bank robbery going on, and he poured mustard all over the top of the car. And then when he called the police, he said, "Hey, your helicopter should look for the car with the mustard all over the top of it."
Nice.
Exactly. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah,
Nice.
I thought that was pretty funny. I thought like that always stayed with me, like those little weird like what is going on type things that you do, kind of like those Hansel and Gretel breadcrumbs.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
leaving a little bread. It's basically what that is. It's a
Yeah,
sophisticated form of a breadcrumb.
yeah, like how many cars are going to have mustard on their hood or
Not
the
many.
top? Yeah, top. Yeah.
So I want to ask you a question, Vince, and I'll bet your answer to this is going to be somewhat similar to what I would say. My question is simply this: what, as a kid, when you were reading these, what attracted you to these books? I mean, you read The Secret of Terror Castle, and you probably said, "Oh, I got to read more of these." In your mind, what was it that attracted you to the Three Investigators?
They were my age. They were full of adventure, and it didn't seem out of the realm of impossibility that I could do something like that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
It's like, wait
exactly.
a minute, these are just like regular kids, with they're not superheroes. They're just ordinary boys, but their curiosity and awe and willingness to get the job done and follow through with something was really that was compelling. That was completely compelling to me.
I felt much the same way. I thought, this could actually happen. This would,
Yeah.
or I could actually do this if I wanted to.
Exactly.
But yeah, it was very realistic in a sense. It wasn't. I enjoyed Hardy Boys, but then I got tired of them after a while. The Hardy Boys wouldn't have been; those two kids wouldn't have been investigating mysteries if it wasn't for their father being a private
Frank,
detective.
yeah, and getting out of a lot of scrapes too.
Yeah, exactly. Now I'm reading those and I'm thinking, geez, I wish my father was a private detective, or a lot of kids probably thought that. But reading the Three Investigators, it seemed more realistic.
Yeah.
Yet
definitely.
keeping that, what you mentioned, that spirit of adventure.
Yeah.
Because
at that time, we as young men, not to say that we don't have it now, because I would venture to say that yourself, Mike, and obviously us three here, we still have that sense of curiosity and awe at the world and sense of adventure, or we wouldn't be doing this. But I think in many cases, unfortunately, that is beaten out of or unlearned not too long after that age of the Three Investigators.
Yeah,
that sense of adventure, that hearkening back to boyhood. That's, I think, is very important for a man's development to actually hold on to that, because along with that comes empathy, a general sense of empathy for the world and the people in it. So I think that's missing with a lot of men these days. So that's why growing up with these characters, I would say they helped in some instances help raise me. These kind of books.
I would agree.
Not that my parents did a bad job, but it was nice to have these books and these writers as sort of passive mentors, if you will. So,
well, my parents did do a bad job, and my escape. We didn't have a TV. My escape was into books like this, and this was a gold mine for me to be able to live in these books as I was reading them. And I started the first one, and then I realized there's several dozen more. And I was like, "Holy crap, this is great!"
Right.
So,
I'll
yeah.
Let me go ahead. Well, a couple interesting anecdotes on my part. So, the setting is in California, in a fictitious town called Rocky Beach. Now, Rocky Beach does not exist, but on the Malibu highway there, the Pacific Coast Highway, not too far from Malibu, there is a place that Robert Arthur had in mind for Rocky Beach which is actually a small section of beach which is rocky. So that I did go there and get pictures and such. I was at the fictitious
kidding.
town of
Well, you
Rocky
got to
Beach.
send me those.
I'll send you those. Yeah, there was a cool tidal pool. I got some crabs and clams and shit and little animals running around. But that was kind of cool. So I was out there. That was 2011, 2012. So that was neat.
Very cool.
And like I said, he wrote these books starting in 1963 when he was living with his great aunt in Cape May, New Jersey. And I didn't go inside the house because it obviously belongs to someone else now. And I'm not going to walk up to someone's door and just knock on, hey, can I come in and see where Robert Arthur wrote? But the house in Cape May still exists. And I've been outside of that. So that's kind of cool. And that's where he wrote The Three Investigators.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's kind of neat.
You can tell writing these first 9 or 10 books that he wasn't just phoning it in. This was important to him.
Yeah,
he didn't look at writing a kids series as kind of below what he wrote for adults. You could just tell it meant something to him. All these ideas, the ghost to ghost hookup, headquarters, the salvage yard. Do you remember there was one book you mentioned, the chalk that the kids carried?
Yes, it was very poignant in the mystery of the Green Ghost.
I don't remember why, but I remember one book where Pete, I think it was, is suspended in the middle of the night on the side of a building, and he writes his question mark there. And then I think Bob sees it the next day, and he's like, "What the hell?"
Yeah.
And he's like, "Sometime in the middle of the night, Pete was here."
Yeah. Well, it's the same.
What's going on?
Exactly. It's the same with the first one. Now that we're talking about and the Secret of Terror Castle, they get kidnapped by but I'm not going to say too much. But I think Jupiter Jones winds up writing in his white chalk on the perpetrator's shoes.
Oh, right.
So later on, when they meet them and they're trying to lie their way out, he's like, "Well, take a look at your shoes, and you're going to see the question mark where you were just trying to, kidnap us. You're the same person with all these disguises." So, much to their chagrin, that got squashed. So here we go. We've got this website here, and let me scroll down. So this is their business card. We investigate anything. And then
what do the question marks mean, Vince?
Oh my God! The question mark is a universal.
They would get this. Do you doubt your ability? Is that why you put the question?
Yeah, they'd always get questioned about the question mark. So the question mark, this is right out of Jupiter Jones's mouth from The Secret of Terror Castle. The question mark is a universal symbol of something unknown. We are prepared to solve any puzzle, riddle, mystery, enigma, or conundrum which may be brought to us. Go Jupiter. Now, this illustration, I love these like ink illustrations.
Oh, yeah.
These are fan. This is done by Harry Kane, and he's my favorite illustrator for.
And I can't tell you how many times I stared at this
right?
on any book. This was on the inside and cover of all
Terror
the books.
Castle. Yeah, this one was always, and the
they're in headquarters there.
Yeah, the one in the headquarters, and then there's one. The Green Ghost is a good one too, with their flashlights walking along the road. So, this is some of the original novels. Yeah, the Green Ghost. The Moaning Cave was good. That was done by William Arden. Let me see. William Arden, and that's a pen name for Dennis Lynn's, his friend. So the first 1 through 9 and then 11 were done by Robert Arthur.
Oh, I see about what you said about 11. Yeah.
Yeah. So there is 10, but he skips number 10 and goes to 11, and the other one's written by his friend. That may have been when he was sick.
I did notice that these are on Kindle now.
Oh, okay.
Now, my question is, and I should compare, but are they, for example, Hardy Boys in the 20s and Hardy Boys in the 60s, they were rewritten. I don't know if you guys know this. Hardy Boys in the 20s, they were very anti-cop, for example. The boys were. That's just one example. And in the 60s, they're more PC. You know, they're friends with the cops and everything. So I don't think there's really anything that anybody would want to rewrite in any of these.
No.
But I'm pretty sure that the Kindle versions are exactly the same text as
I would imagine, especially
versions.
with Elizabeth Arthur, his daughter. In fact, his daughter and her husband are writing 26 new titles, each based off the letter of the alphabet as far as its title is concerned. Now she has
Three Investigators.
Yeah, she's doing his daughter's doing new stories. In fact, I'll share. Let me stop sharing that, and then I'll go over to that one, and we'll see her. She has a Substack called the Salvage Yard, which makes sense. It's kind of a cool name.
Yeah.
So let me go over here and I'll present that. Where is that? Yeah, here we go.
Oh, cool.
I am the daughter of Robert Arthur, the creator of the Three Investigators children's mystery book series. And as I write this, my husband, Stephen Bauer, and I are just finishing a 4.5-year project of co-writing 26 new Three Investigators books, one for every letter of the Roman alphabet. In the new series, the titles of the books are not only alphabetical, but also alliterative and metaphorical. The first book, The Mystery of the Abyssindarian Academy, begins with the boys on the cusp of turning 14. See, you're still young. Turning 14, and the last book, The Mystery of the Zoroastrian Zodiac, ends just after their graduation from high school. That's kind of cool. They do it.
So there is an arc there, yeah.
There's a little bit of an arc. So that's neat.
That is neat.
I don't think there's any photos.
Oh, I found her Substack. This is so cool, man.
Yeah, definitely follow it.
I'm subscribing to that right now. Yeah. And we haven't even mentioned Alfred Hitchcock.
Oh, Alfred. Yeah, the original series. It ended with Robert Arthur's death. But they were called Alfred Hitchcock and the mystery and the Three Investigators presents. Alfred Hitchcock would introduce, because Robert Arthur had a working relationship in Hollywood with Robert Arthur, because he was involved in a lot of radio programs and plays and such, and short stories based on promotion by Alfred Hitchcock. It opened with Alfred Hitchcock giving a brief introduction to the Three Investigators, maybe like a paragraph, and another paragraph or two about the story. So that was
that was my first introduction to Alfred Hitchcock, as a matter of fact.
Yep, same here. I thought that was kind of cool.
Yeah.
So.
But yeah, I wonder. I think his thinking, Robert Arthur's thinking, was that the books would get more attention that way, and they probably did.
Oh, I would agree with you there. Absolutely. They were for me. It was an instant hook. There was always action. It was basically action, like all pulp. There's just action from the get go.
Yeah.
There's very little exposition. It's all action and really good snappy funny in some cases too, dialogue.
This sense of adventure, this sense of curiosity that they had, that I loved reading, and you did too. I don't remember which Sherlock Holmes story it is, and I'm going to badly paraphrase this, but Holmes says to Watson one time that they're both interested in all that is, bizarre in the world. In other words, he's saying to him, we both love mysteries. That's why we're doing this.
You can't live without the thrill of the life and the macabre.
Yep. Absolutely. Yep. Well, Jupiter Jones
you
was
definitely terrified of a life without the thrill of the macabre. That's what
Yep. Yeah, that's Jupiter Jones was definitely a chip off the old block of Sherlock Holmes, that's for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, so Sorry, what?
Oh, he had this curious mannerism when he was thinking of pinching his lower lip.
Yeah.
You could tell they could tell he was thinking and really laser focused.
I'm remembering now. I don't have it yet, but The Mystery of the Green Ghost, that cover was fantastic.
Oh, that's so.
I remember just looking at that so much as a kid.
Yeah, the story itself is cool because it takes you out of Rocky Beach to other locations. Because a lot of stuff obviously happens around Rocky Beach and the immediate environs, as far as you can get with a gold-plated Rolls Royce, and not being too obvious about it. But yeah, this one takes you out of different environments, and one in which, towards the end, the adventure Jupiter Jones does not partake in. And that's all I'm going to say.
There's another short-lived series, but for all that, extremely good series that, to me, I don't think of Hardy Boys in conjunction with the Three Investigators. I think of this other series, and the series is called Brains Benton, and it's only 6 books. I have all 6. I should have grabbed them. They're behind me, but they're very much worth reading, and they invoke the same sense of adventure as the Three Investigators, Vince. You should check them out.
Brains Benton?
Brains Benton. I read those over and over as a kid as well.
Okay. Is that set in the same time frame?
Yeah, written in the 60s.
Oh, okay. The 60s were such a great time period for pulp literature.
Yeah.
Isn't that interesting? They're like,
fantastic.
Most people think of like pulp from like the 20s and 30s, but that stuff was coming out in the 60s.
Oh yeah. And dare I say the 70s and early 80s. Especially,
I was going to say it definitely made it into the 70s, and sadly it was in the 80s that it shifted.
It took a crap. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'd say the pulp kind of almost shifted into movies. Possibly. I don't know. Like that I mean,
a little bit. I mean, movies started to become a more lucrative venue, that's for sure. We're taking some of these pulp stories and and turning them into and spin-offs and such. So
yeah, but grab the first one, Vince, and
okay,
tell me what you think when you get time.
I will.
If you like Three Investigators, you'll like Brains Benton.
Okay, and what's the name of the first one?
Instead of making a bunch of noise, I'm just gonna Google it here for you.
Google that shit.
I'm gonna Google that shit.
Google that shit.
All right. The first one is The Case of the Missing Message, published in 1959.
Oh, it's alliterative as well. I always like alliterative titles.
Yeah, not exactly. The second one is The Case of the Counterfeit Coin. Now, the third one is not The Case of the Stolen Dummy.
Okay, Stolen Dummy. Aaron Clary.
Yeah. And the last one was published in 1961. So really tight. Yeah, I mean, they came out fast in a few years. Now, I'm reading them 20 years later. And again, they don't feel dated at all. I mean, being a kid, I mean, I had a Commodore 64. But other than that, being a kid in the early 80s strikes me as not too different from the 60s. I mean, I wasn't there, but
yeah.
Well,
as far as no, go ahead, Robert. Please. Please. We've been talking.
I was just going to say one of the things I found interesting in doing a little research before doing this episode, because I hadn't read this series of books. In fact, it only was about 2 or 3 minutes ago that it occurred to me what children's books I might have read as a kid, because I was reading other weird stuff at the time. So most young reader stuff went completely unnoticed by me. But I guess the series is super popular in Germany to the point where they actually made like a movie.
Oh yeah, I saw the movie
in German.
Oh no, I saw the English movie. They made one of those.
No, they have two. There's two English versions. There's two English versions. On one based on the Secret of Terror Castle, and the other based off the Secret of Skeleton Island.
Yeah. So it's just
they are
interesting that they resonate so strongly with the Germans, which
that is interesting.
The movies,
you know, and you mentioned reading children's books as opposed to other stuff. I was telling a friend this not too long ago on a podcast. When I was a kid, I basically read, I guess, if very generally, two different types of books. Category one would be Three Investigators, Hardy Boys, Brains Benton, kids books. In other words, and I would read young adult novels. Long story short, I wanted to experience what it was like to be a regular kid through these books. And then category two was I was reading all kinds of adult stuff, horror, science fiction, all kinds of stuff. But for both categories for very different reasons.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it took me a second. The only young reader kind of stuff I ever read was I read a few of the Great Brain because I had a it really wasn't a connected family. My grandmother's adopted family nephew or something like that. Anyway, he was visiting my grandmother, and since he was around my age, they kind of wanted me to hang out with them, so I did. And I guess every night his mother read him a bedtime story, and she would read a chapter of Great Brain. So I got to hear 2 chapters of one of those books, and I thought, okay, this is vaguely interesting. And I think it was right around the time that they made a Great Brain movie starring Jimmy Osmond, one of the youngest of the Osmond brothers.
Because the Great Brain was set in like the 1890s or so, right?
Right. So this would have been in the 1970s, around the time, like I said, it was around the time that they made the movie in the 70s with the young Jimmy Osmond as the Great Brain. And so I was able to check out a few of those books from the library, from a local public library, and I read a few of those, and I thought they were kind of interesting. And I think probably the biggest appeal to me was the fact that they were written about a time before I was born. So the historical aspect was of interest to me. And the other thing was the fact that there was a certain look at the interactions between different theological beliefs, primarily Christian theological beliefs, in the sense that you had Catholics, Protestants, and of course Mormons in that area. And so that dichotomy I found interesting because I was just a very strange, geeky little boy.
Yeah, you remember the one where Tom goes to Catholic school?
Yeah.
And he's selling candy and all that kind of stuff.
Yes.
And then there was a book set exactly in the same time titled Me and My Little Brain, about the adventures of his little brother while Tom is away.
Yeah.
Am I the only one hearing music?
Yeah, no. That's just our background music.
Oh, okay.
It's called Suspense.
The soundtrack to my life.
But
exactly.
So those were about it, because most of what I read as a child were nonfiction books about various aspects of history and adventure, science fiction, fantasy type books. And obviously comic books. But those were the big things I read. I mean, the books I actually learned how to read in were a series of occult encyclopedias called Man, Myth, and Magic. So, cool. Yeah, that's, so I'm seeing 60s, 70s naked pagans doing rituals and stuff. So that's what I was exposed to at a much too young age. So yeah. But I had a sister who had like the Little House on the Prairie books, of which I tried to read the one about Almanzo or Alonzo or whatever, the Laura Ingalls Wilder's husband's book, and the Farm Boy or something like that, whatever its title was. And then I had a few 60s era Hardy Boy books, the ones with the hardcover blue covers.
Oh yeah.
So I had a couple of those that I tried reading, but that kind of stuff just didn't, I don't know, it did not grab onto me in quite the same way a Robert Heinlein novel or some weird Dawes yellow jacketed fantasy book written by, anyone.
It's almost the age that you're read or you either read some of these books, I feel like there's some books that if I had read at a certain age, I wouldn't have liked, but then you get older or you're young and you read them and you suddenly appreciate it because it just depends. Like I read a lot of these books that you've referenced when I was younger, and they left a much bigger impression on me than they would have if I had read them when I was older. And then there's some books where I read them when I was younger and I didn't care about them a whole lot, and then I read them when I was older. It's almost like a lot of books are for people at a different stage of life, and they're not intentionally written that way. But like you read a lot of stuff and you're like, okay, I don't appreciate this, but then you get older and you go, okay, I get what's going on.
You're a totally different person when you're reading it. Yeah.
Right.
What's the old saying? No man steps into the same stream twice.
Right.
Because it's not the same stream and he's not the same man.
Well, like I'll just throw out a random example. The Two Towers, where Theoden is talking to Gandalf. His son's just been buried, and he says, no parent should have to ever bury their child. I'm a bachelor. I have no kids. That doesn't mean the same thing to me as somebody who's lost a child, or either as an adult or as a child, like they're young or whatever. So it's just not going to mean the same thing to me. That scene is not going to hit me the same way. And so a lot of books where the author is writing from a perspective, or they're just they may not even be intentional about it. They're just writing about what they're saying, but this is where it affects you differently. So there's some books where people love it or hate it, or they just are indifferent. But it's really a lot of it is just our personal experiences where we read stuff and it's like, I really don't care about what's in this book. And then for some people, it's like they feel like they're reading their family history or something like that. So this is one of the difficulties of like assessing the value of a novel or a book or like its quality, because for some people like, oh, I didn't like the story at all. Well, because it didn't affect you at all, right? It didn't appeal to you, and you can say that. Just say it didn't appeal to me. The movie didn't appeal to me, but that doesn't reflect on the quality of the film itself.
I recommend a lot of books, and in horror, I've got a kind of big following. But my point in saying that is only this: is that if I read a book that my policy is I talk about books that I have liked, that I read and I enjoyed. If I read a book and I didn't enjoy it, I don't ever mention it. And because I feel it's almost irresponsible of me to say, this isn't a good book, don't buy this. Because, well, maybe it is a good book and it just wasn't written for me.
Right.
So.
Yeah. I mean, Mark Twain went through a bunch of books that were written by the guy who wrote Last of the Mohicans, and he criticized his like literary style. That's kind of a different thing where he's like saying, hey, there's inconsistencies in the book, there's whatever. But you're reading certain novels, like for example, I've read Cormac McCarthy's novels and I appreciate stuff about it, but one of the things I don't appreciate is his lack of like quotation marks for speech, like when someone's speaking. I don't appreciate that. And someone else mentioned that. I'm like, yeah, I don't appreciate that either, because it's like it makes it confusing to read the book and appreciate it, but it doesn't take that. It's not like an emotional thing. That's like, I want to know when someone's speaking and when someone's not speaking in this book, you know. Whereas you read a certain part of a book and you have an emotional reaction because it affects you in a certain way that's specific to you, but it doesn't affect other people the exact same way.
Yeah.
It's interesting to me thinking of Mark Twain critiquing James Fenimore Cooper. That's just because their styles are definitely very different.
Well, and I've read like Tom Sawyer, and like I'm sure that people could criticize Mark Twain's writing style and other things like that, and the way he did things, because it took him 5 years to finish Huckleberry Finn. But it's just like, it's as long as you're like, who are you writing to? The readership. Who's your readership? Who are you trying to write to? Can they understand you? If that's your goal, is I want these type of people to understand me, then you kind of achieved your objective. Like if you're writing, it's kind of, I'll give it just a kind of a general example. Like Walt Disney was always appealing to the common masses. He wasn't appealing to the critic. So when critics said, "Hey, I think this is a bad idea. I don't think this is a good film," he's like, "I don't care. I'm appealing to like the average person." As long as he did that, he was kind of achieving his objective. And it's kind of the same thing with like authors who are saying, I really don't care if critics think that it's a good book, as long as my readership continues to read, I don't care.
Nobody of any substance writes for a critic.
Yeah.
I mean,
and look at how successful Stephen King is. I mean, he's an anomaly. He's so successful. And how many awards has he won?
Yeah.
None, I think.
Well, I mean, I've given certain females in my life grief because they've really enjoyed the Harry Potter novels and movies, and I'm like, I couldn't get through any of them. I tried reading the first one. I tried reading because they were just, they were not written for what I have been at when the first one came out in my 30s or something. They were not written for a fairly well-read 30-year-old man. They just weren't. And so I have been somewhat judgmental and snarky when it comes to fans of Harry Potter that are, grown-ass adults. But some of that, at least for women fans, you can write off as well. They never really mature past junior high or high school anyway, so it's fine that they like children's literature. But talking about Lord of the Rings, Vince and I have talked before how we have read that like at least once every 10 years of our life over the last 3 or 4 decades, depending on how young we were the very first time we read the Lord of the Rings. And Vince and I have both talked about the fact that we get different things out of it and appreciate different things from it at each decade mark when we reread it. But specifically to what you said, the scene where Theoden is burying his son and has that moment with Gandalf talking about, the pain and grief that he has basically woken up to. Right. That always resonated with me even as a child. That hit me in a weird way, and it kind of in the same way that I could appreciate the song Cats in the Cradle by Harry Chapin. I was basically born like 30, so in my head I was always seeing things or through a certain level of maturity or adult, and from the thought of being a father losing a child.
Look, we have a comedian in the chat. Well, Benedict Tiberius Cato, if you had shown up earlier,
Yeah.
you would have been privy to the Three Investigators talk, as with all open forum chats and open-ended chats. These segue into various topics.
Yeah.
So don't make me
Yeah,
ban you for
we
50
spent
minutes.
we spent quite a lot of time on the Three Investigators for sure.
We spent almost 50 minutes on that. So you missed it.
Yeah.
You have to go back and watch. This will be not membership, so you'll be able to go back and watch that, Benedict.
Yeah. So I just wanted to contrast that with TJ. So even before I was a father, I understood that grief, and that was something that I pretty much dreaded my entire life, even long before I had children of
no,
my
AJ,
own.
don't ban anybody yet.
Yeah. So that's all I wanted to say on that, just because TJ had brought it up. So I wanted to kind of touch on that, and since it so.
I really enjoyed this, you guys. I have to run though.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, that's fine. We're coming up on the hour mark. We'll let you go. We'll go on for another couple minutes, and then we're gonna call it a because I've had one hell of a week. So
Yeah, you have.
I need to try to get some sleep, because sleep has been very short in coming.
Before you go, real quick, have you ever
Sure.
read any of the Perry Mason novels?
No, it's something I've never gotten to.
Okay, because there are aspects of these, the way they sound, that almost kind of remind me of aspects of some of the Perry Mason novels, but I don't know. I've not read the one, nor have I read enough of the Perry Mason novels to form a cogent comparison as far as their writing styles or story similarities, but it could just be in relationship to the time period that these books were written, as far as the Three Investigators, and the time that, say, the Perry Mason TV series was airing, that shared aesthetic or similarity in time frame there, from the transition from the end of the 50s into the 60s, and the fact that the first of the novels was written in 59.
That was Brains Benton, but the first novel was published in 63, I believe.
63,
the second one in
okay.
64.
Yeah.
Well, I think they were both the year of 64. He started writing them in 60. He started writing them in 63. So you are correct in that regard. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but anyway, so there's a certain similarities, but it could just be the backdrop of California in the late 50s, early 60s, and that kind of feel. So that
I'm familiar enough.
Picking up on it.
Yeah, I'm familiar enough that I can see what you're saying. Yeah. Before I go, I just would also like to reiterate that if you're watching and you've enjoyed the Three Investigators as a kid, and maybe as an adult too, I certainly have as an adult.
Oh yeah. I still read them.
Check out the Brains Benton books. There's only 6 of them, but the short version is, if you enjoyed Three Investigators, you'll enjoy the Brains Benton series. The first one is called The Case of the Missing Message. And if Robert Arthur wrote the first 9 and number 11, I guess, of the Three Investigators, and he also wrote a lot of other things too. One of my favorite horror short stories is by him, as I said at the beginning, and it's called Footsteps Invisible. I don't know where that was collected recently or even in the past, but you can listen to it for free on Pseudopod. Just Google Pseudopod and Footsteps Invisible, and maybe Robert Arthur, and you'll find it. So Thanks for having me, guys. It's really great always to be here.
Yeah, always a pleasure. Thanks for joining us.
Great to have you on.
Vince, I'm thinking about you, man.
Thanks, I appreciate it.
All right, good to see you guys again. Thank you,
Mike. Catch you later. As always, a pleasure to talk with Mike.
Yeah, it was a good chat.
Yeah, it was
Good
chat. I like to keep. No, good chat. See, I like to keep these around an hour, even when we have guests. Because let's face it, most everyone has short attention spans. So the ability for most people to go back and sit through an episode of anything, and I'm not excluding myself from that. There are certain things I don't listen, I like, and I don't listen to the whole thing either. So I do appreciate, even you, Benedict. I do appreciate you all coming in the chat and hanging out with us. I'm sorry that you missed the core of the talk of Three Investigators. So I would advise you to to go back and listen to that. That was good.
Yeah.
So we'll hang out for a few more minutes. If anyone in the chat does have a question about anything Three Investigators related, pulp related, or just a general question that you want to throw at us, please feel free to do so. We'll hang out for a little bit. How you guys doing, by the way?
I'm doing all right. Like, some parts
That's
of my
good.
life, like, can't do any better.
Cool. That's good to hear. Very nice. And you, Robert?
Oh, it's been kind of a rough week, but that's you can relate, so I'll leave it at that.
Yes, yeah. I'm not gonna. We'll talk about that some other time when I'm.
A
little
gonna bring
further
that up
removed.
now, but
yeah. That's good. I'm glad you're having a good week, TJ, and Robert. I hope your week is better.
We'll see. Like I said, we'll talk about that later.
Yeah, we'll both hopefully have better weeks. AJ, Star Frontiers. It's funny you should say that. I just was looking at my box set, my original box set recently. We do need to get a game up and running in Star Frontiers.
Yeah, we all make characters, or at least the three of us make characters.
Yeah, you TJ and AJ.
Hey,
let's see.
You guys want to do Star Frontiers? I'll do it.
All right, cool. Maybe I'll run one of the pre-made modules in December for Christmas. That might be a good Christmas thing to do.
Christmas special.
What is on the schedule for fall? Okay, so the schedule for fall. Let's see. Obviously D&D games, random chats, painting, and the Masculine Geek Battlefield Gathering is in November. So we're going to play some D&D around the table. TJ will be there, AJ will be there, and two other gentlemen that have decided to join us. They're from the area, actually. They live in the Pennsylvania area, so they could just drive out for the day. So I'm not sure if I don't want to throw Robert under the bus. I'm not sure if he's coming. It's up in the air for Robert. So, but he obviously has his own. He has a room is waiting for him if he decides to show up. So that's cool. But right now the fall's light. We do have Brian Bowden coming on for Robert and I were talking about this. Brian Bowden is coming on Friday, October 25th, and he is the paranormal investigator and cryptozoologist guy.
Yeah. So our special annual MG Halloween show. So talking spooky stuff. So that ought to be fun.
Yeah. So join us for that. Stop in the chat and say hi. Make sure you get in early so you're not wondering where the conversation's going. He cracks me up.
Although with Brian, it's pretty easy to be spooky talk the entire show, whether it's spooky things out in the woods dark at night or spooky things going on in bunkers around the country under your very feet. So it's always a scary time.
Absolutely. We may be talking. The actual spelling of his name is Bryan. So you fucked up twice, AJ. Yeah, we could talk about the Dulce Wars. Absolutely. That's an eye-opener. I have several books on that I just finished up, actually. I want to do like a video essay and talk about these things, and then it's for my own edification. I don't even care anymore. Just do it for myself, and then we could talk about it with Brian. That's fine. But yeah, you are a disgrace to your. I wouldn't say that. I can't speak to your family, but you're definitely a disgrace to yourself. That's for sure.
I don't know, Vince. You saw the thing I sent you on Twitter.
Yeah,
about the Italians who left this beautiful alpine beauty for New Jersey.
Oh yeah. Well, we have a great alpine beauty for burying bodies in the Pine Barrens.
Yeah.
So that's
That
there's
reminds
your
me of
beauty
that
for
Bugs
you.
Bunny cartoon. You're a
Yeah.
disgrace to the regiment. I'm gonna have to throw you out of Soyvis.
Right? It's a great cartoon.
You call
I
yourself a Mountie. You're a disgrace to the regiment.
One of the
forgot
local
about that one.
channels here on Saturday, part of their Saturday morning lineup that starts at 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, something like that. They've got an hour of Woody Woodpecker and that company's cartoons, so Chilly Willy the Penguin and stuff like that. And then they've got a half hour
Inspector
of
Willoughby.
Popeye cartoons and stuff like that. So my youngest really digs Popeye and really digs Woody Woodpecker. So when we visited an ice cream shop in Myrtle Beach, and they had an old 50s or 60s era electronic ride of Woody Woodpecker. It was like a rocket with Woody in it, piloting it, and Chilly Willy the Penguin sitting on it. And I think there was maybe another little character from that company. And so the ride was short. It was 30 seconds, but it's this ancient machine, and he just thought it was cool as hell when he was really little. So but yeah, I like sharing that with him, because in the case of the Popeye cartoons, some of them were done by Max Fleischer, who did those old original Superman animated cartoons, which were just absolutely amazing works of art. And back when Superman wasn't this all-powerful thing, when he literally didn't fly, he leaped tall buildings.
I think
a
that's
single
crazy.
bound.
Like the original Superman, because I listened to the original radio serials. He could not fly.
No.
Yeah.
He could only leap.
Yeah.
Leap tall buildings in a single bound was that was the point, was he couldn't fly.
Yes.
Yeah.
It was only later on in the cartoons and other stuff, he could fly. He could actually literally fly.
Mm-hmm.
Now, granted, they said he's not flying, he's leaping. I'm like, okay, that's okay. Anyways.
Which is another reason why the original Captain Marvel was better than Superman, because he really could fly, because magic, powered by the gods.
The original Superman was actually, I think, a villain. He was not a good guy. The original Superman, as written, was not a good guy.
Is in Action Comics #1 Superman?
I think so. 09/39, 1939. Don't ask me how I know that. The original Superman was not. He was a villain. He's actually looking it up. He's fact checking me in real time.
He's like, I don't believe that shit. You're full of shit, TJ. You're wrong. Actually, you should totally actually TJ right now.
Factually.
Well,
the problem is he's probably looking at it right now. He's like, shit, TJ's right.
he's got the pensive hand on the lip thing going.
Yeah, that means he's like, oh shit, how do I explain it?
I actually do have an action. It's a reprint of Action Comic #1, but I do have one. And cool. I don't know, because he's always been kind of a homage to Moses, amongst other things.
Right. So. That's I was gonna say, I get the whole, he's the hero, but from what I understand, originally he was the bad guy.
Well, as I remember it, because like I said, I haven't read that in forever, because Superman. If I really want to read interesting Superman, I'll just pull up a Doc Savage. I mean,
yeah,
so
that's where the Fortress of Solitude came from, Doc Savage.
Yeah, right. That's what's crazy. that blew.
Yep.
Well, that and and the Batman's Shadow, so which is which is one of the cool things about that one Batman the animated series was the fact that, you know, he had his childhood hero being the Gray Ghost, who is kind of the Shadow-esque looking character. And what was extra cool about it is they had Adam West voicing the Gray Ghost.
That's
Yeah, I love that. I love that.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
that kind of stuff I think is cool. That isn't like the little memberberry stuff that they throw into modern things. Like, see, there's an Ewok. Remember Ewoks? You love those in Return of the Jedi. So like this new Star Wars, because see, there's an Ewok.
right.
And it wasn't like that. It was, I like things that are legitimate homages to the inspiration or the source from which some of this stuff springs. It's today. There was an episode of The Waltons that I caught part of. It's a 5th season episode, I do believe, and they were setting up a memorial in town. I believe the year it's supposed to take place is like 1938, 1939, but they're setting up a memorial in town on Walton's Mountain for the guys from that area, from Jefferson County or whatever, who fought in World War One, which John Walton, the dad, did. And I guess like one of his brother was killed in the war, and there were other local guys from the community that had died in the war, and there's this memorial and stuff. What was interesting was in the area where they were setting up the memorial, and they had like these graves. Some of them may have been legitimate graves, and others were like markers put to remember these guys that were buried in France. One of the crosses said Earl Hamner, and Earl Hamner Jr. is the guy who wrote Spencer's Mountain, which was the book that inspired the movie Spencer's Mountain, which eventually became the TV series The Waltons. So that was an interesting little like Easter egg in that particular episode, which, you know, I am sure someone has probably noticed it, and it's probably on a Waltons wiki somewhere, but just catching that and watching it today was just kind of interesting, because when I'm home during the week, especially if I'm home with my youngest son, Waltons, Bonanza, Gunsmoke, you know, those are the things, the Rifleman, that's what he gets exposed to. He's not watching some, you know, cut off your junk Nickelodeon kids show. You know, that's, you know, he's watching things that, what channel is it? One of the cable TV channels has warning labels on that this show presents outdated cultural representations of such and so forth. And it's like, oh, screw you. But anyway, so yeah. So I'm indoctrinating my son with TV westerns from the 1950s and 60s.
Can't go wrong.
There you go.
That's really cool, actually.
So any other questions from the chat or anything?
All right,
other than AJ wants to game again?
I think we're going to call. Oh, I think I blanked out there for a minute.
Yeah, Chris is absolutely right on that. If it has a warning label on it, you know it's good. Or it's suppressed by YouTube because it has masculine in the title, and we're not bashing men. But
yeah, right.
Yeah.
Story of our lives here. All right, gentlemen, we're going to call it. We're going to call it an evening. It was a good talk. And good to see you guys and talk to you guys, as always. And everyone in the chat, thank you for joining us.
Especially all the regulars.
Yeah, the regulars are always a pleasure to see in the chat. And TJ, if you would do us the honors of taking us out.
All right, guys, you know the drill. Keep the fires burning. Keep the wine flowing. Keep the lead shooting down range. Keep the fires burning. Don't take anyone nickels. Don't drink all the rum. And tune into the upcoming episode.
That's right. And until then, to everyone's health, enjoy your week and your weekend. To you guys.
Shante.
Something. Lante. All right. Take care, everyone. It's something. And we'll play one of our outro ads.
All men are geeks. Stop denying it, you bastards. And some of us are tabletop role-playing game geeks. Join us for some non-SJW, non-woke, non-PC bullshit, old-school advanced Dungeons and Dragons. At least once per month, sometimes twice, we get together with Dungeon Master Rollo Tomasi and Drew Bay for some dice slinging in the world of Dungeons and Dragons. If you're tired of the woke assholes that abound in tabletop gaming, these sniveling, overly sensitive, easily offended dipshits, then be sure to tune into Masculine Geek Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. We're not politically correct. We're raw, unfiltered, and uncensored Dungeons and Dragons gamers. Get on board, pussies. We're making history. No broads allowed. Get your own game, ladies. Spurgs and tards need not apply.